Hello everyone, this is Ishtar Babilu Dinga, the Naked Shaman. The day after, Black Monday, another Black Monday. I wanted to tell you a little bit first of all about why I've called these programs the Naked Shaman. It's because I get most of my inspiration in the shower. I live in Glastonbury, which is part of the world that's known as Avalon. And the waters of Avalon have long been known for their inspirational and healing qualities. I'm lucky enough every morning to stand under the waters of Avalon in my shower. And I get most of my inspiration there. And what I often find is I want to capture it before it goes, because it can disappear quite quickly. So I'm often sitting here typing out articles dripping wet with just a towel wrapped around me. I was telling a friend about that, and she said to me, well, you should call yourself the Naked Shaman, and that's how it came about. But it's more than that, really, because it's also, well, I don't want to use the word truth because that cannot be used in an absolute sense, but it's this kind of naked expression of how I feel about what's going on. It's raw, it's not at all glossed up or airbrushed. I don't use euphemisms. I'm not bound by political correctness. And in that way, it's also naked. So anyway, going back to the shower, yesterday was Black Monday again, and we're getting used to these Black Mondays now. We know what it means. But I had an inspiration as I was, standing under the shower, a poem actually came to me, and I want to read you that poem because it's very, very condensed information, but I'm going to unpack it for you in the course of this broadcast. And so the poem just came. It's very simple. It doesn't even rhyme particularly. Here we go. Okay, here we are again, folks. Just another pitch black Monday. Strap on your seatbelts and enjoy the ride. Just a lot of rich people losing money that doesn't exist in the Schrödinger's dead cat bounce. That's all. It's just a simple 6-line poem, which to me, I kind of knew exactly what it meant, but I thought, well, most people won't. And so I'm going to unpack it in this broadcast because it is actually incredibly profound, because it is about the state of reality that most of us live in until we wake up. And by wake up, I don't mean wake up politically, because there are some people that think that they're awake, who are arguing, that Jeremy Corbyn is better than David Cameron, or Donald Trump is better than Obama. This is not an awakeness to compare, for example, a capitalist candidate with a socialist candidate and think that you're being given a choice. The choice is an illusion. And this is the illusion that Schrödinger's cat brings out. Now, why I said Schrödinger's dead cat is because on the markets there's something known as the dead cat bounce. And those of you that follow the markets will know this. The dead cat bounce is just their expression for how the stock market reacts to a bust. So when there's a huge bust like there was yesterday, the force of it drives down the price of stocks and shares so low that it brings in lots of other buyers who want to buy cheap. And then the stock starts to rise again. And this reverberation of like the bounce is known in the markets as the dead cat bounce. Schrödinger's cat is something else, and that's where we're going to go into the other dimensions, because Schrödinger's cat is a feature of quantum mechanics. And as I often say, if we replace quantitative easing with quantum easing, we'd all be a lot better off. Anyway, this is where Schrödinger's cat comes in, and I'm going to come into that later, because I'm going to be talking about the astral planes and how everything is actually controlled from the astral planes, including the dance of the marionettes, the Punch and Judy, the right and the left, the false choice that we're given to persuade us that we are being given a choice. It doesn't matter what you call any kind of economics. You can argue about the benefits of Keynesian economics or free market economics against market controls. You can argue the relative merits of nationalisation against privatisation. But at the end of the day, it's all one kind of economics. It's casino economics. And we live and die by the casino. And the reason everything is run by the casino is because we are run by a criminocracy who cannot think in terms of... It never even occurs to them, to be honest. And if you're not really awake, it's just going to be hard for you to realise. It is hard to wake up because it means being very, very grown up and realising that the people that are in power over us, whether they're left or right, really do not give a stuff about our future, the development of our country, our nation state. They have no loyalty to our nation state, and they have no loyalty to us, largely, because they've been bought out by the people that run the casino. So if you think about it, if you look at... I used to notice this when I was younger, and I kind of bought it for a long while because I didn't know any better. But you know, there are a lot of rich, very, very rich people that are actually left-wing. And you see them backing all sorts of left-wing movements. For example, the Labour Party came out of the Fabian movement, which was, you know, it came out of some very rich people living in London at the beginning of the 20th century. And they started the Fabian movement. It wasn't started by the working classes. It wasn't started by the unions. There were no unions then. The most prominent Fabian family today are the Goldsmiths. And talking about casino economics, James Goldsmith was one of the few, and George Soros was another, but James Goldsmith was one of the few to get his money out of the stock market before the last Black Monday when it crashed. And I remember that Black Monday very well. I was living in a place called Sevenoaks, which became famous because this Black Monday, just by coincidence, there happened to also be a hurricane for the first time in the British Isles, or first time for a long time. And it took down, the town was named after the fact that we had 7 prominent oaks up on the Vine cricket green, which was the oldest cricket green in the country. And it took down 5 of the oaks. And so we became the sort of, talking point of this hurricane, and we became 2 oaks. Jokingly, people referred to us as 2 oaks. But I was living there, and I remember that hurricane, and it was pretty terrifying. And when we woke up in the morning, there were trees everywhere. And, Sevenoaks is one of these leafy commuter towns on the outskirts of London, half an hour by train into London. So lots of people that work on the stock exchange, also a lot of journalists and opinion formers of various kinds, like to live in these leafy suburbs just half an hour from London so that they can get into London, get into their work. But at the same time, they're somewhat removed from it. There's something called a green belt around London, and it's just the other side. The green belt is land that you can't build on. And in Sevenoaks, the green belt is made up of the North Downs. So you're just the other side of the North Downs, and because of that, you really feel like you're not living in London. You feel like you're living in the countryside. So this hurricane hit Sevenoaks, but it also hit a lot of other commuter towns in that area, that whole commuter belt, going right round to Guildford. And because of that, the trees fell across the railway line, this famous railway line that gets them into work so quickly. They couldn't get to work. None of them could get to work, because it took about 2 or 3 days to clear all the trees off the line. And on that day, it just so happened, the market crashed. And that was the first Black Monday. I think it was 1980 something. I haven't got the date on me, but I think it's 1985, something like that. Maybe 1986. If you look it up anyway, just do Sevenoaks hurricane, you'll get it. So basically, this was the first one. And in those days, we didn't know anything about weather control, weather manipulation. And we also didn't know about market manipulation. What was just seemed to be the most terrible perfect storm of an accident now seems to me very obvious what actually was going on. These events are always controlled. and to learn how they're controlled is part of the process of growing up, because nobody really wants to grow up. It's much easier to think that there is some kind of saviour from either the right or the left that's going to come and save us. But actually, there isn't. We live in a criminocracy, and the only way forward for the criminal-minded is to basically fleece us for every penny we've got. And so we had that. The last real big crash was in 2008, and I lost everything then as well. Not that I had any money on the stock exchange, but basically there was no work, for about a long time anyway, and I was used to being able to find work as a freelance journalist, and there was nothing. But it coincided with about the same time that I was getting very, very deep into my shamanic practice, and it made me I see the good side of it, because it made me go deeper into that, because there was nothing else I could do, and that has resulted in my life being as it is now. So anyway, to go back to that, we need to start to really wake up from this whole right and left deal that we think that we have a choice in. It really is a false choice. Whether you vote for Jeremy Corbyn or whether you vote for David Cameron again, all you're being given is a false choice between socialist fascism or capitalist fascism. And both are run by a criminal regime that use the astral planes. And that's the bit that most people never wake up to. And until you're awake to that, you're not awake. Most commentators on the alternative media still think that this is a political choice that we have, and that we should somehow, get the bad people out of power. But if we do that, there's a whole load of so-called good people waiting to jump in who will be just as bad. Until we are awake, we can't really sort out this problem, because the seed of the solution lies in the problem. But if you're not ever allowed to see the problem, then you can never sort out the solution to the problem. And, the people that are running this casino that we live in are very good at hiding the problem from us, distracting us from the problem, convincing us that the problem is something else than what it really is. What it really is a multi-dimensional state that we actually live in. And until you realise the other dimensional part of your being, you're still just living in this dimension. And so you'll see everything from the point of view of this dimension. But you're only living a half life, because you haven't realised your full potential of being a multi-dimensional human being, which is your birthright. This is not something special that only special people can have. This is something that you're born with, this software, but you are not taught how to activate it. Only a very few are taught how to activate it, or have been for thousands of years, in fact, probably since at least Roman times. And that was the purpose of the Romans, spreading their empire everywhere. It was to really put that on lockdown, because a lot of pagans, as they called people pagans in a kind of detrimental way. So I don't often use the word, because they didn't mean it in a good way. They meant it that these were ignorant, is their word for peasants. But these so-called peasants actually were living much more in a multi-dimensional way than they were, say, 100 years later, when Christianity had taken hold and they'd had it all knocked out of them, and those that wouldn't comply were killed. That's the story, by the way. We're often given this story about the Christians being fed to the lions in the Roman arenas. But the Christians that were fed to the lions were the Gnostics. The Gnostics were the mystic Christians. And the mystic Christians were fed to the lions, yes, basically, because they wouldn't agree to this regime of only living in this one dimension and believing in the story that they came up with of their Jesus who died on the cross for all our sins, which was originally started off as a Gnostic story. It's actually an astrological metaphor. That's why Jesus has 12 disciples. That's why there's so much about fishes, because it's about the age of Pisces. to the knowledgeable person, to the person that lives in both dimensions, in all dimensions, it's very easy to see what the original Jesus story written by the Gnostics was all about. But the Emperor Constantine wanted to take this story and literalize it, to say, no, there really was this person called Jesus who really had 12 disciples, who really fed the masses, the loaves and fishes. And if people don't believe in this, then they will be killed. And many, many, many died under this regime. And we're still living under that Roman regime today. We're still, except there has been this very, very narrow window which is already closing. I would say this window started to open probably when the baby boomers were born. Something happened when the baby boomers were born on the astral planes. And we've been very much, the baby boomers have been very much leading this awakening, this spiritual awakening, not political awakening, this spiritual awakening. The astral planes is not the dimensions that the shaman journeys into, although shamans often do journey into the astral planes to do their work. But the shamanic dimensions are created by spirits purely for the aim of the evolution, the spiritual evolution of the human being. The spirits created those planes in order to have a place to interface with the human being, so the human being could be coached and trained and developed spiritually. The astral planes are something else. They're not created by spirits. The astral planes have been created by magicians, and these magicians and alchemists, going back to at least John Dee, were in the pay of the ruling classes. If you look at, I've done an article, I think somewhere, I'll see if I can dig it out, about alchemists in the 12th, 13th, 14th century. I mean, actually, you can trace alchemists in this country back to the 10th century. And there's quite a few of them, and they were trained in universities in Europe. Most of them were trained in a university in Montpellier in France. Seemed to be a very popular place. Others were trained in Rome. Many of our kings were trained in Rome as well, by alchemists, by magicians. So we can at least, I think I've managed to get back to King Alfred. So definitely King Alfred was trained in Rome in magical practices, let's say. And that's how I've actually written about this in my book, The Sacred Sex Rites of Ishtar. It's in one of the last chapters about how he won a huge battle against the Vikings and banished the Vikings from this country. And he came from nowhere with nothing to do that. But he actually had the magic. He was using the magic of the land. And so the land rejected the Vikings. This is what we're not told. When you look at these alchemists going back to medieval times, the alchemists were either in the employ of kings and various rulers of the time, or they were locked away in jail, or they were killed. There was no such thing as a freelance magician, a freelance alchemist. The most successful ones have always been in the employ of the ruling classes. We see a very good example of this with John Dee, whose number was 007. Then that whole lore came down to us in Ian Fleming's James Bond books, where he gives James Bond the number 007. Yes, so Ian Fleming gave us the James Bond books, gave us 007, and then in the Olympics, part of that whole magical ritual brought in that number again, brought in 007, in the way that we saw, they pretended to bring the Queen in with James Bond in a helicopter. The whole of the Olympics actually was based on an astral magical ceremony, which can be found, the basis of which can be found in The Tempest, Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. So I'm just throwing out little clues here about how you can find more about this information, about how we are controlled astrally. I don't want to go into too much about it because this is a journey for you to make. I will put some links at the bottom of this for you to follow it through. But when you see how this control measure works, then you can see what the real trap is that we have to get out of, the real problem that we need to find the solution to. And the shamans can find this solution. And if you were to work shamanically yourself, you could also find it. It's a multidimensional solution to a multidimensional problem. And there is no other way of tackling it. There is no political leader that's going to come along and sort this out for us. There is no saviour. There is no second coming of an avatar like Jesus or Buddha or Krishna that's coming to save us. There are no ETs that are waiting for us to reach a certain point before they will come and save us. These are all different ways that we've been distracted from the problem so that this casino magic can continue. Casino economics can continue. It's a rich man's trick. And if they had their way, they would turn the whole planet into Las Vegas, because to them that's their ideal city. I don't know if, just briefly mention this, I don't know if you remember the Gambling Act, which the Labour Party tried to bring in 2005, and I think it gradually got watered down till it no longer existed. But they really seriously, their idea to redevelop Britain after it had been destroyed by Margaret Thatcher destroying the manufacturing base, their only idea that they had was to bring in super casinos. And those super casinos were not just going to go where the rich were in London. They, in fact, were going to go to where the poor are. All these cities where there was such high unemployment, now that the mills were no longer working, now that the factories were dead, I think they were going to go into it was proposed that they would go into about 40 cities, like up north, the cities like Liverpool, Birmingham, Sunderland, Newcastle. What they are now referring to as the Northern Powerhouse. That's where they were going to go. There wasn't going to be any power. It was just going to be a sucking machine. Because all those people, I think it's well known that, unless you're a really Las Vegas high roller, poor people are really attracted to gambling. More poor people buy lottery ticket every week than anyone else, because it's just like this hope, that somehow their boat will come in, against all the odds that their boat will come in. And if these super casinos had been set up in these places, it would have just been devastating. They would have just milked everyone completely dry, and also encourage gambling addiction. And they, again, this is another ploy of theirs. They like to, the latest addiction is debt, and boy, would people have got into debt to them if these super casinos had been allowed to be set up. It would have been terrible. It would have devastated this country. And I think they realised they'd gone too far, because they gradually watered it down, this Gambling Act of 2005, until they ended up with just one super casino, which was going to be put in Manchester. And then soon after Gordon Brown became Prime Minister, he actually cancelled that. So the whole thing was wiped and they didn't go ahead with it. But when you think this is a Labour government, this is all Labour has to offer. They don't care about bringing wealth into this country. They don't care about developing the regions so that people have employment. They were just going to put gambling casinos there because they come from a criminal mindset. The whole world is run by a criminal mindset. And we need to overturn that criminal mindset before we can even start to sort this problem out. And we need to understand the controls that are coming from the astral planes, which make sure that we're always distracted by this Punch and Judy show of left and right. Anyway, that's probably enough for today. I'll put some links for you at the bottom so you can follow through any of these subjects that I've been talking about today. And thanks very much for listening. I'll see you next time. Thanks.